Recording in progress.
Thanks, Robot.
Ah.
Oh, I'm here with Nicki, who is in Berlin and has just sent me a message letting me know about a project in Berlin for communities to come together under the headline of the garden, I think you called it, a way to connect existing communities together and deepen the relationships between them. And I got very excited about that. And I said, let's jump on a call and talk about it. And I'm sure you've got some questions and I've got things to think about out loud with you. So I'm really glad you're available to just jump on a call with me and maybe share this later if we think it's useful.
Nice. Yeah, glad to be here. Glad to have you and your time, Yeah.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure. Do you want to give a little snapshot of what's the project?
Sure. So, I've done the Microsolidarity course with you, which really inspired me. And since then, I wanted to do something here in Berlin. And now it's called the Berlin Microsolidarity Project. And it's a collaboration with Karl and Jocelyn Ames, who also was actually, I found out, doing this part in the original Microsolidarity practice course that you offered. And the idea was quite simple: to get people together that we love and that we trust and that we would also like to collaborate with and practice some microsolidarity together. And there's lots of little communities, little hubs in Berlin around us that are, really, really nice. And we wanted to put them together in, even in a deeper connection. And so there's this co-working space that we have called Co-op Space. And there's the Beehive, which is like a little community that formed around a Burn event, the Kiez Burn. And then there's Life Itself Hub, and there's Pura Vida Festival, and then there's Church of Interbeing, another really nice project. And so the idea was, how about we just get all of these people together, a bit online, a bit offline, and practice together. And the two main questions we asked, like, what does true solidarity mean? Like, what really supports us? How can we get needs and gifts together? How can we practice wholesome group spaces? Basically the microsolidarity questions. And also this second question that you always put, like, after emotional intimacy, how can we get into a collaborative spirit? So doing meaningful people is also nice. Doing meaningful work with people we love. And so, the question is how to smoothly also transition into that space after deeper connection. Yeah, so that's
really rad.
Yes, and maybe about the format, it's quite simple as well. We have a kickoff meeting this Saturday where we have 4 hours of just connecting, coming together, exploring a bit self, a bit dyad, forming crews. And then we have 4 calls, which means that everything will happen in crews. So the crews can meet offline, in person, and they will be connected with us online. And then we have 3 optional hangouts. We have this co-working space. So we thought it'd be nice to get to know the congregation level more. So the crews can all come together in a sort of relaxed way, and maybe it's semi-structured. We haven't decided exactly yet what we want to do there. And then there's a final meeting also in the space with all the crews together, where we do appreciation, retrospective, and seeing how we want to go on. Yeah.
Super nice. A question that immediately comes to mind is why now? You did the course with us maybe a year or 2 years ago, and what is it about now that makes you feel ready? And it's like I've read the invitation and stuff, and it seems very clear and ripe and straightforward. And we're going to do this. This is what you're invited to. This is who's invited. It's got that clear list. And yeah, it seems very mature and ready to go. And I'm just wondering, what was that process of maturation like?
A number of factors, I would say. There has been more talk, and especially the Beehive, which is a really tightly knit community already, of connecting in a more structured or deeper way. And so that conversation was brewing. I was like, okay, it's really ripe. But the deciding factor was really meeting Karl and Jocelyn, I did these salons also in our co-working space on different topics, and one was entitled "Whatever the Question, Community is the Answer." The quote from Margaret Wheatley, and it was mainly about microsolidarity and some other bits. And Karl and Jocelyn and some other people from Life Itself showed up there, and then we got talking, and it was just instant love, like so aligned, same vision, similar backgrounds, similar interests. And they are here in Berlin for some time, and said, well, let's just what can we do together? And I was like, well, how about a microsolidarity project? And there are already these communities, and we have these platforms set up, and we have this co-working space. So I think it was just the time was right, and all the different factors came together to make it happen. And I couldn't be happier, because it's exactly what I want to do at the moment. And working with like Karl and Jocelyn, and also there's Catherine from the Cultural Catalyst Network as well, and Felipe, a friend of mine, we're building this kind of core crew. And also I come from science, so for me it's an action research project. So it's really, how can we do this systematically and sustainably? And they were really up for that and saying, all right, let's practice what we preach and teach. So the core crew also forms a microsolidarity crew. So we had a couple of meetings already where we practiced the stuff that we want to do in the learning and practice journey as well. And we also, of course, the meta crew, we call it, like to zoom out and to design and to figure out what works, what doesn't work on the fly. So, and since they said, yeah, let's do it, I'm like, yeah, of course, let's do it. And so we don't know what's going to happen, but I'm really excited to do it. Yeah.
I've collaborated with Jocelyn and Karl a bunch now, and they're so fun to work with. So high integrity people that like doing stuff. Like they just have a lot of energy to give, and it's such a gift to find the right collaborators. It's so like catalyzing. I mean, that's why it's called the Cultural Catalyst Network, right? Because they catalyze you.
Totally. Yeah, that was really so good. And yeah, I never had it quite that strong to just like, yes, it clicked immediately.
Oh, that's awesome. So I'm curious, what would be helpful for us to focus on? Like, is there something that some questions you're holding and things like that?
Millions of questions. Where to begin? I have some notes here. So for me, one question is just the general research question. Like, you have these people, and I really see them as like the participants as participant researchers. So what questions to ask, how to ask them, what could be a good outcome. Also, you shared before that you think of this as a research project. And I read again the questions that you wrote on the Microsolidarity website. So yeah, what could be juicy things to ask? I was thinking, for example, of journaling, or I mean, we will do a big retrospective. But yeah, in general, how to write down insights, that's often difficult. Basically, how to capture what is happening by itself already. That's one question I'm curious about. And what would you like to ask? Like, as the founder of Microsolidarity, what would be the ideal outcome for you from this project? That you would like. Maybe that can be a starting question.
Yeah, sure. The ideal outcome for me is, the first word that comes to mind is replicability. Meaning, as a design principle of the gatherings that I've been co-hosting, for example, like there's one philosophy which is like, oh, let's make this super well designed and have a sophisticated choreography that takes people through this journey, and then they're going to come out transformed. And I've worked with collaborators that have a very sort of intensive way of working with a group, where it takes a lot of resourcing, and it gets a big deep outcome. And in contrast to that, replicability means like, what's the kind of simplest formula that I always say that fits on a PDF, that can be put into text and doesn't need a whole lot of nuance or like depth of understanding or heaps of experience, but someone can kind of like just read the instructions and have an instinct for like what they should do. That they will obviously, if they're a first timer, they're going to lack some depth, but that they will fail in useful ways, or that like that the most important things are sort of taken care of. And so like my gold standard is the case clinic practice from Theory U. And it's not because I particularly care about Theory U or I particularly love case clinics, but that it's the best balance I've ever found in a practice between anyone can read this 5-sentence instruction and almost everyone that does it has a really good experience, like that it just tends to produce connection and insight very reliably. And that to me feels like it's gone through a process of R&D. They must have taken it through a process of R&D to get it to that refined state. And I would love for the Microsolidarity network to be producing practices like that, and like stacks of practice. So like your program of, oh, it's 6 weeks, there's going to be this thing, there's going to be this piece, all of that whole formula makes a lot of sense to me, just reading it at a sort of like first impression about there's going to be some face-to-face stuff. There's going to, I mean, even the fact that you put together a Notion site with some text and some videos, and like people are kind of watching the presentation in their own time and deciding if they want to join it. All of that is like a sophisticated use of communication. And already the stuff that I've seen feels easy to replicate, because it's like you can clone that Notion, right? If there was another community in New York that wanted to do something similar, they could clone it and then adapt it to their own context. So that's just like my first impulse is, what can you do? Because this is the thing, I guess I know with Jocelyn Karl, they're both really deep people with a lot of experience in this stuff. And the problem with depth is that it cannot be very accessible to people. You know, that it's like, oh, it's really fun to do the advanced stuff.
Yeah.
And the risk is that we kind of leave people behind. Whereas I'm like, oh, let's keep really good, easy, open on-ramps, and then people can take their own journey of depth, you know?
Man, that's very similar to what I was thinking regarding like an MVP, or what's the base practices that are important for people to start, and then what can you stack on top of it. Yeah, and also a question that is in my mind: what's universal and what's very specific? Because the people I invite now, it's very clear. Many of them are facilitators. They are the people that I could think collaborating with, so they have already quite high emotional literacy and have been in certain contexts a lot, that already use many of these practices that we're actually going through. So the question is, what are the universal things that work everywhere, and how to create a program that you could just roll out anywhere anyway? When people speak English, they have access to the internet. What would that look like? And then if they're really interested and go deeper, then you can like do more deeper IFS and NVC and mindfulness and all of these other things. Yeah.
I guess the other piece that comes to mind that's related to this is, like, you already told me that the catalyzing element was finding these other collaborators that wanted to be in the core crew with you. And now you're saying you've got this first list of people that you know that have a certain level of emotional literacy. So both of those are a kind of filtering process of like finding the right people to get started. And it's like, how do we define what that filter actually looks like? Well, maybe one way to get this is like, tell me why do you start invitation only? Why is it not open or like a ticketed thing or something where anyone could sign up?
The reason was it was really this cross-pollination between communities that I was very interested in. So it was bringing people together, which were already kind of connected, but strengthening that network. And also it was that question of, who do I want to collaborate with? Because I see so many lovely people around me that have the heart in the right place, that want to contribute, but they're all struggling still by themselves a little bit. And I was like, that cannot go on, including me, you know. I was like, how can we do this together, you know, and use the full potential? Because at the moment it's not used completely, and that makes me a bit sad about my own potential and about the communities I'm in. So it was a very deliberate choice to ask people I already like and trust to start with that. And also regarding practices and feedback, I thought that this group of people would be a really good first cohort. Of course, not representative at all. It's a highly biased sample, but deliberately so. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm asking to try and understand, like, if we were to name some principles for someone that was wanting to replicate this, like, what are the principles of like who you start with, and like, I mean, even the fact that like in your presentation you mentioned a maximum of 6 groups of 6 for the first cohort, you know, so like, that's really useful, I think, to think in that sort of scale. And yeah, I'm wondering what are the other principles besides just like hard number, but like how you choose. How did you think about who goes on the list? You know, because that can be an awkward thing. That's like exclusive. You have to be this cool, or whatever, you know, like there can be these kind of shadow sides of that. So what's going through your mind as you're deciding who's invited for the first round?
One really gut feeling of who I think would fit well together. And starting right here, right now, like so many things are lost in cyberspace, and was like, no, one criterion was really you're in Berlin at that time, like you can attend the live meetings. So not to, I mean, this whole garden, you know, putting roots somewhere and then like going out from there. So that was one important factor, and just people I want to hang out with. It was really that simple. And then Karl and Jocelyn invited many people, and also, yeah, these different communities. Just seeing, like, there was some choice. Might need more people from the co-working space. How about getting them in, or more from the Beehive, or something like that. Yeah, I think that was the basic criterion. Yeah, but it's a bit difficult, like what to choose, who to choose, and stuff like that.
It sounded as well that in your vision, assuming things go well and, you know, people are excited to do more together, that in future cycles you relax the criteria in a way, or you invite people that you wouldn't know so well already, maybe that it opens up a bit. And can you speak a little bit to the rationale behind that?
Like, I mean, there's a lot of potential here in Berlin at the moment, I feel, and there's many different initiatives coming together. So after this first cohort, I thought it would be really nice. There is this Church of Interbeing project. I don't know if you heard about it. It's a project initiated by Adam, and it's very lovely. And like people coming together in a church close to the Temple Oberfeld, and just doing a service together, like kind of like a secular church service. And it has some meditation, some dialogue, some movement, and some song. And after that, you share food, and it creates such a lovely vibe and community around it. So I've been talking to him a lot, and he was also at the beginning in the core crew, but had too many other things. But he was like, wow, how about we roll this out in this other project, you know, because there is this potential. And how about we use that potential even more, and you build crews or exchange needs and gifts and all of that, to just tighten it more, to have that mycelium even more tightly interwoven. And then there's another, for example, a festival called Pura Vida Festival, also happening here, and the people who make it are also in our co-working space. So it's all like intertwined. And they have this thing called hives, so like small groups that meet once a day at the festival to come together in a smaller group and exchange what's going on, and like reflecting a bit on their experience and supporting each other. And I was the hive guide last year, and that was really, really nice. The whole festival was really nice. And this year we are designing it also with a bit of microsolidarity in the background, or thinking of how can we use this potential that is unfolding in this festival experience, because I was pretty high, you know, without drugs, just from that experience.
Yeah.
And the question, of course, comes, all right, how do we use that momentum? How do we use this connection that was created and make it systematize it, or make it sustainable, take it into the real world? And so this went into this designing of these hives process. And I will probably offer also for people from the festival, if you like this sort of small group work, there is a possibility of forming a congregation or a crew or any of these things. So the next iteration will be much more open. But what I find interesting, making the roots that are already there visible. Like there is already a root system in the church. Church of Interbeing. There is already a root system in Pura Vida, and not going all out. Like I would never want to put it on Facebook, but rather like, you know, like honoring what's already there and then maybe combining it a little bit. And this exclusivity, there's this guy called Peter Kruse. I don't know if you know him. He's a neuroscientist and was working a lot with the organizations. And he said one thing that's stuck with me, that in times of like interconnectedness like crazy, exclusivity becomes a luxury. Like that sometimes you can't, as you always say, you know, like you can't trust 10,000 people immediately. It's just not possible. So basically the question, what is a good group to start with? And also, how many people do you need in a certain cultural mindset already in order for others to come in, you know, and then spread that culture more or take it on? And
I just want to reiterate a point, I guess, that like when I've written stuff for Microsolidarity, I've tried to pack a lot of insights and opinions and, you know, like my ideas, I guess. I'm trying to pack a lot into a small amount of space. And one of them that I want to make more explicit is that I think there's kind of like one problem, which is like, oh, I don't have enough connection. I don't know where to start. I'm isolated. But then there's another problem, which is like when there is, say, like a cool festival that gets some energy behind it, I think they tend to grow too fast because there's like such a strong, people have there's such a huge need, there's such demand for more connection that when something's working, it's like everyone wants to rush in. And there's like a couple of ways that can go wrong. One is just that you don't actually have enough shared values, trust, whatever, to be able to handle the inevitable conflict that come up. But also that even if you do have that, or if it's organized in a way where it's like sufficiently strong, and there's a lot of festivals now that have been going for years and they've scaled to tens of thousands of people, but they're done the way they achieve that is by making it more like a product and less like a co-created thing. And the people that are, most of the people who are participating don't really have a sense of responsibility or ownership or anything like that. And so like part of the reason I'm like always hammering on the small scale is like I want to have a critical mass of people in any community that feel like they've got hosting skills, they've got the responsibility and the gift of being able to like pull people together, that if things are not going well, they can change them, that people have that sort of sense of civic responsibility, you know, that like the job of creating the social fabric belongs to most of us rather than just a few. Maybe not everyone, you know, some people it's really like not their thing. And we're really grateful for the gifts that they have instead, but for that it should be kind of like most people feel like they can contribute to that. So I'm saying that now, I think, because I anticipate that this could go really well and grow very fast, that there could be, this is the thing with Berlin and in any other kind of center of, there's like a counterculture with a lot of people in it. Like that all these people can swarm in and it like really changes the flavor of it. So I'm like, this focus on the small, on the little cells of 6, like please keep it.
Yeah, totally. And for me, I'm so grateful for this whole format that you created, you know, that you have the congregation and that should be a limit, you know, the Dunbar number. I'm like, yes, and then you start something new, you replicate, you don't scale infinitely. And for me, the plan now, because Karl and Jocelyn, we just talked a lot and like, yeah, we could do another iteration afterwards, and it's just trying it out and seeing what happens, you know. And I would do a church service at the Church of Interbeing about needs and gifts, I think in like 1.5 months, and then I will introduce, by the way, if you would like some more of that, you could join, you know, and seeing how it goes and also seeing if it works in a different context. It's yeah, and getting these people, man, I was so amazed by the amount of amazing people, you know, so wanting to get them together and get them to support each other, that just makes me happy. I'm like, all right, let's do it, let's try it. And of course, also after this iteration, if it doesn't go well and people are like, all right, that was cool, and we go our separate ways, totally fine, you know, it's like really open. But I suspect that there might be something coming out of it, you know, but we'll see.
I have another question, which is, when I read through the invitation, it seems, like I said, quite clear like it's this long, it's on these dates, we're following these practices, this is what you're invited into. Compared to other initiatives, which would be like, oh, I've got these lovely people, let's bring them all together and we'll talk together about what we might do. You start from this very consensus-oriented posture.
Mm.
And I wondered about what was your thought process like, or is this new for you, or are you used to doing things this way? Like, just what went into that approach of starting with like quite a clear plan?
I think often I want to over co-create. And that was also, we had another talk like 3 months ago, and you were also sharing in this talk, like, yeah, start with something clear, that you want to bring, like be a proper caller. And that was going into my thinking. And I think it's just an iterative approach, just trying it, seeing that's the MVP that I find useful. And the co-creation bit is a bit hidden, but it's definitely there. So that's also a question that's actually on my list that I can hopefully take off in a second. There's so many people with lots of dreams and ideas in this space. And I hosted another salon some months ago about dream sharing, like how important it is to share what your dream is, or your ideal project, or something that's been cooking within you for some time. So on these hangouts on Monday, I would love to go into dream sharing, of people just sharing what they're passionate about. And a question that I have in my mind is, what is the smooth way of going from this more emotional intimacy into collaboration or co-living, which is a huge topic at the moment. Like in this bubble, everywhere it's like, oh, where do we live together? Where do we do permaculture? Where do we do inner and outer regeneration? It's everywhere. And so, yeah, the question that comes up for me again and again is how to make that transition smoothly and see what wants to emerge and what also doesn't, because if there's a million dreams also there, you're like, all right, what do we focus on? Yeah.
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that I don't think it's necessarily linear from emotional to economic solidarity, right? Like, that there are some people who find it a lot easier to connect over practical stuff, and that's the way that they build trust with each other. And that yeah, you might that actually could be something to pay attention to, that you might find the original structure of the invitation invites people who are very emotionally literate, like you say, but like completely impractical. So it's good to have a balance. Like I'm thinking, I learned so much of this stuff at Inspiral, and Inspiral went the other way. Like it was all about the founder, Joshua Weil, had a vision about how we should be working on more meaningful stuff. And so he just recruited as many people as he could find that seemed to have some professional skills and some aligned values, and said, let's just get projects. And he went through, I think, a very exhausting process by recruiting literally hundreds of people and bringing them into a company where he was like the ultimate responsible person on the hook for legal stuff, and like he went the hard way.
Oh, wow.
But it did do a process of filtering where we found like by the end of it, there was a really strong core of high trust people that also had a lot of that entrepreneurial spirit. So yeah, that's the first thing I think, is that it's not, don't expect it to be linear. And actually, I would be looking for opportunities. Maybe the first cohort is fine because it's literally like six pulses, right? So that's not that long. But as things go on longer, look for opportunities to do practical stuff. Oh, we're in the co-op space. Well, let's like, I don't know, paint the room, or even just cleaning up and like cooking food together and just doing stuff. Like I think one of the reasons Burning Man and the related communities have done so well is because people build a camp together. There's like the very easy way to find your place to belong is like, oh, I'm the one who's like really good at building these structures, and people value me for that. Like, so look for that. And then the other thing is just about, I'm such a like looping tape on this, but starting small. So like, start with low stakes experiments and with not many people. So one of the things you'll probably find, if there's any enthusiasm in the group, once you've got 30 people or 60 people in the group, some of them will have this orientation, which is, I don't know how to describe it well, but it feels almost like this deep psychological drive that everyone should be doing the same thing. I don't know what it is. It's like maybe it's something about their relationship with their family, or I don't know, but like we all need to do this thing, and they'll try and mobilize everyone to work. But they're like, oh, we could do this project. And I personally pushed pretty hard against that instinct. And I'm like, try and encourage their vision and celebrate that, but help them find what's a small way to test that idea with like 3 people instead of 60. Because when you're mobilizing everyone, everything gets really complex, and the price of failure is really high, you know? Whereas if you can just say like, hey, I've got this contract and I need a designer to like help me out for 2 afternoons. Do you want to help me on it?
Yeah.
Oh, that went well. And maybe on the next one, we should build the whole contract together and we work together for 3 weeks, you know, like this like gradual escalation seems to me a much more natural way to move.
Yeah.
And that means, like I say, actively inhibiting some of the enthusiasm to go big too soon.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. At like what comes to my mind in the burner culture, you know, they have this dreams platform, or at Borderland and now at Kidsburn as well, where you post your dream and then people can support it with their like ticket money. And I was also thinking, yeah, how could that work? You know, where you have maybe a bunch of ideas that come up. Let's say you have 10 ideas, and then having like a voting system of, oh, what could we focus on and who would be in, you know, and yeah, I find that really interesting of what plant wants to grow and what actually doesn't. There's no nutrients. There's not enough sunlight for every plant. And yeah, I like what you said, starting small with a small group of people. Yeah.
And the dreams platform is a good example, because that always starts, as far as I understand it, it starts from, I want to do this thing.
Yes.
Will you support me? Rather than what could we do? You know, which is a really different orientation.
Yeah, and that's also a question. We built this Notion template for ourselves, like basically we wanted to for the co-working space it started, to what is a good way to create this template with sociocracy built in, with psychological safety, like how can we bake in all those principles that we believe make for good collaboration. And now we're using it also in the Microsolidarity group with like docs and tasks and meeting notes and all of that, but having it all in one thing. And now we're thinking of creating like dream share templates of like exactly as you say, I want to do this, I have this amazing dream and this is what's needed, and I need these amount of people and maybe this money or this funding, to make it like as concrete as possible, for others to say, oh yeah, I have a similar dream, or I'm in, you know, and to get that step from expressing a dream to let's fucking do all these dreams. Like I'm really up for going. Like, yeah, these are like really things in my head. How to make it so easy that you just can't help but do these projects together, or actually just get started on them. You know? Yeah.
I think there's got to be a way of like elevating or giving our attention to the people who bring that agency, the initiative, and like celebrating them, and then making it easy for people to copy them, and sort of like so one of the things about your clear invitation for this program is that because it's well designed, it actually inhibits people's agency, right? For the first round, you're not expecting people to come in and be like, oh, why don't we try this practice instead of that one? Like,
Yeah.
that comes in the second round.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, where are the opportunities in the ways that you organize to find the little sparks of agency and fan the flames, you know, and really encourage people, and to do that at the right time, you know, like you said, that you don't want to do the co-creation thing too much too soon. But it's a balancing act, because if you take care of things for too long, people will just expect you to take care of things. They'll get that expectation, and for good reason. So there's this like,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, for me, the idea is really this action research principle of
Mm,
like when we think of our community, what could be small actions to bring solidarity in, like, or like, yeah, starting this mindset. And many of the people that are in this first cohort are already deeply in this mindset of contribution, of service. Um, yeah, but that's the main sort of co-creation aspect and helping this project along. Like what could be like retrospective, I find is very good for that, and also the dream sharing
mm.
for co-creation. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah. I'm wondering about if there's going to be a second cohort, if there'd be a chance for people to step in, like new people to join the core team, or even for it not to be core team anymore, but there might be multiple cells that each have different responsibilities. You know, like that there might be defined roles that people can step into. That's one way to build that sense of ownership.
Totally. I mean, we thought, for example, I invited the church into being hosts, like people who host the service once in a while, to take part in this iteration, in this cohort, and then with them we could microsolidarize the church of into being. You know, like it's really
Sweet.
I don't want to do that. I want it to happen. You know,
Mm,
so yeah, all the way seeing, and I think what fascinates me is what you share, this replicability, and that certain formats, like for example Goenka, you know, this Goenka Vipassana style, you know, it's like one dude recording some sessions and it's everywhere, you know, and
yeah.
it gives so much goodness to many people, you know, and so much
Mm,
benefit. So I'm like, all right, what's the sweet spot between having a clear structure and maybe also clear practices and clear capacities that you want to build, and then also not getting stuck in that structure, but rather like what's the sweet spot between co-creation and creation in the first place? Um, yeah,
yeah, and this is probably the point where it deviates from Goenka, um, which is holding the practices lightly. Because the whole Vipassana thing is like you do the practice, do it this way,
work.
and you get the results. And it worked for me. So
Yeah,
I love it. But if you took that same approach to nonviolent communication, for
you
example, I'd be
can't. Yeah,
really concerned. I'm like, I don't think it has the depth to be treated um, with that level of commitment. Like I think for most people that those kind of frameworks work a lot better when they're being remixed and like people are moving between different sampling from different ones and like understanding what's good about each one and when do I deploy, how do I like find the spirit of the thing that's not in the words, but it's in the intention behind the words. That to me is like a lot safer way to operate.
totally. Yeah.
Have you thought at all about the risk of the core practices being treated as this kind of like, you know, I don't know, something precious and untouchable, or like how to keep them light and just useful instead of them becoming this like religious text?
Yeah, I actually had the idea of creating a little video as a resource of showing many other practices, like for example, the practice that you list on the Microsolidarity website, that there's many practices, and this is certain practice that we chose for this one iteration. Yeah, I'm aware, but I don't think that there is a danger because these people in this first group are very experienced and
Mm.
yeah are familiar with probably most of the practices that we will do. And my hope is also that they give feedback. Yeah, by the way, yeah, you did the case clinic, and if we tweak it a bit like that, and have you heard of this practice, you know, like of really being a core, turning into a research group of how do we actually do that, how do we do it online, how do we do it offline, like there's so many research questions in the air about like inner and social technologies that I would love the input from all of these people, and making it
Mm.
clear this is an experiment. We don't know the
Mm.
outcome. Let's always step back and let's not assume that we know the answers, and keeping a beginner's mind. And yeah, but
It,
it's a good hint. Yeah.
it was awesome as well to see you had liberating structures on the list, because I really trust the rigor, again, the way that they've done the R&D on those, the way that they apply very well in different contexts and different scales. And more than any other practice that I know, or like school of practices, they're so open to new people showing up with new ideas and like remixing and trying things out, and their whole developmental process is completely transparent. You can you can get on their Trello board and see like what they're working on, and you can join in the meetings and all that. So that's super inspiring to me. Like that's kind of, I don't feel, like I've described Microsolidarity as an R&D network, but I actually don't know anything about research. I know about development. I know about trying stuff, but like when it actually comes to putting a little bit more rigor and structure around these things, it's not my gift. So I'm really inspired by what they're doing, and I'm inspired by even the fact that about action learning and these kind of things, and that you're bringing your templates around how to structure this learning process. I think is going to be a massive contribution.
Yeah, I hope so. And I mean, I come from science, but I'm not I come from psychology, so I'm not a social scientist. But what I would love is to, once there is some sort of data, that's also why I asked, like, what kind of data would you like to gather, that you can go to other groups of scientists, because I know some people from Berlin universities, and say, all right, how do we make this into a rigorous framework? How to get funding for it? Because for me, it's the endeavor of the next years. Like, how the hell do we sense make, choice make, and do collective action? If we don't figure that out, it's going to be tough to survive. So, like, getting very smart people with very different gifts involved to do that research, because I want to do R&D in this similar sense, I think, to you, and not do data analysis too much. That always bored me a little bit, I have to say. Certain frameworks. Yeah.
There is a question that I have. When you mention psychology, it reminds me of it. Like, the reason it takes a lot of effort to become a psychologist is because it's dangerous to mess around with people's psychology. The reason people are not more vulnerable with each other and they keep things to themselves is because it's dangerous to disclose some of your deepest experiences and issues and complexes and everything. They can be weaponized against you, and even if they're not someone trying to do something bad, if you're sharing about something really, you can be re-traumatized by sharing about traumatic experiences and so on. Like, there's a lot of where microsolidarity stuff gets close to a bunch of dangerous territory, and so we have things like psychology and these like professional frameworks that train people in how to stay safe and give them structures of supervision and like these kind of systems that are trying to reduce the harm. And I have a sense that there's a lot of good that we can do in a more like peer-to-peer amateur way, but there's a limit. So, for example, there's this refreshed interest in psychedelics, and I'm like, in this certain context, I feel really good about non-professionals hosting kind of healing spaces using psychedelics. But I know that there's a line there where like I'm out of my depth. The problem is I don't know how to describe the line. I don't know how to anticipate it. I don't know how to communicate about it really clearly. So that means you're not going to see me putting on like a psychedelic experience weekend, because I just don't know how to get it really safe. So I don't know how to frame that into a really nice, concise research question, but something about knowing the limits of what can be done with peer support, and how to like anticipate the potential harm and give people good guidance beforehand. Like you're describing, these are all well-known people that we have this existing trust, but I'm thinking when it's rolled out to more people, people who we don't know so well, some of whom are walking around with just like enormous traumas and horrible things that have happened to them. How do we guide them to be like, oh, actually, this is not the right space for you. This is like, you need to talk to a qualified therapist who can like give you the kind of professional support that you need, and go and do that for 6 months and then come, like all of that sort of territory to me is like really vague and seems very important.
Totally. And I don't know the answer at all, because it is such a thin line between sorry to disappoint you. Yeah, it's a question I ask myself as well, because I've been also working with the Mind Foundation, which is like a psychedelic sort of research group here in Berlin. and they are going all the way. Professionals do it, professionals, and I think it makes a lot of sense to have professionals in the room. But also I like experimenting myself, or if there's groups that are doing it, like it could be more democratized in my view. But of course, yeah, those limits, like if everybody's an ayahuasca shaman and can really mess people up, those are powerful things, if you don't know how to deal with them. So yeah, I don't really know, but it's such an interesting question to ponder. And I wonder if there's any disclaimer, or like how do you go about it? Like, is there I, I mean, I have some trust in people recognizing if if it's not the right context for a certain person or a certain issue. But maybe a
Yeah.
disclaimer is good of, by the way, if you're feeling that this is too much for the group or the person, or harm can ensure, that you say that, which of course is also
Yeah.
difficult to say. Mm.
Yeah, exactly. I think one thing that we've been doing lately that I feel really good about, Nati has been studying a lot more about how to do trauma-informed facilitation and collaboration and stuff. And I think a couple of things that have come out of that for the way that we facilitate now is much more focus on interoception, people's physical inner reality, and keep reminding people like, hey, it's time to stop talking and start to feel what's going on inside of you.
Mm.
And to really put a lot of effort into developing that inner sensitivity and understanding like your body actually knows what's safe and what's not, more or less. Like some people are going to be extremely disordered and they won't be able to tell, but most people, they have some embodied responses to things that are like unsafe for them. And it's a real art form to be able to distinguish what's like a healthy stretch, like, oh, I'm out of my comfort zone, but I can take this for a short time and then I'm going to return and recover. From actually, like you actually said before that you were at this festival and you were really high, off the vibe of being with people. And when you're high like that, you are intoxicated. You're not actually perfectly in touch anymore with like what's going on for you. And that's the place where people overstep their boundaries and then later regret it and have this big like vulnerability hangover.
Mm-hmm.
So like really as a host, putting the effort in to like keep people sober through the process and to anticipate that like if this process is going well, you are going to feel like elevated states. You are going to feel kind of high, and don't make commitments during that, and don't disclose everything about yourself to someone that you've just met, in that state. And there's something there that we haven't done yet, which I'm really looking for a practice to really anchor, which is about how do people say no? How do people pass on an exercise? Or like, because we can always say, oh, so everything's optional, but there actually needs to be some kind of guided, formalized, socially authorized process of people stepping out and feeling good about it and it being normal and like, oh, it's like I needed to pee, so I stepped out to pee. It's the same thing, like, oh, this one's not for me. You got to step out, and it's not a drama. It's not like you have to push through some peer pressure. I think we need some really good practices that just make it effortless for people to track their own boundaries and step in and out at the right times.
Yeah, and actually to learn that skill takes some time, to be okay with saying no, or I have to step out. Yeah, very good point. Yeah. Mm.
I think I had more that I wanted to say about that safety stuff. Yeah, like you said, disclaimer. I think we can do more to let people know about, and it's really hard I don't know how to do this gracefully, but to let people know about the risk, basically, like that we are, like I said, if it's going well, we are entering a state of neuroplasticity. That's what healing is, and you want to be careful to do that with people that are trustworthy. Like if you're going to let people in to like modify your psychology, you want to be able to trust them. And so like, how do you evaluate whether someone's trustworthy?
now when I hear you speak, I realize that that's a big factor of why I wanted to do it with these people, because I really feel already safe, and I feel that this will create a container that will be safe for others as well, that might not know all the people so well. Yeah, I haven't thought of it in that way.
I had another a thing came back to me, which is one of my mentors that I've learned a lot from is Billy Matheson. He's a group process facilitator in New Zealand. Really astounding fellow. And I've asked him about this. He does a lot of work with young people, so it feels particularly important. And he's got almost, I would say, almost like a cavalier attitude. He's like, no, it's fine, just go for it. But his kind of advice to me was, so long as you are actively like on the lookout and that you have a process, like as a hosting group, that at the end of every event you debrief and you talk about like what were the near misses, you know, like where did things get a bit wobbly, or like, where did you see like, ooh, we got lucky on that one, or like have a process of really uncovering, you know, like, so for example, in one of the events that I did a few years ago, there was this dynamic where it seemed like there was a kind of, it just seemed like one of the sort of teacher people and one of the student people were kind of flirting with each other, and that was just it just like made me uncomfortable. And so that was one of the things where we talked about like, we really actually need to have a hard line, that there's like, we're not going to cross this line during this event or even for months afterwards. But having a space where we can talk about those little awkward or not quite, or like that could have gone really badly but it didn't, like those kind of things.
Yes, and I mean that's very good for this question of, okay, what data do we want to gather? I mean, this is like the most important data point. What did not work, or what was challenging for me, or where did I feel bad in my body? Yeah, because that shows you where things went wrong. I'm wondering if I find more questions that I wanted to ask, but we already went through quite a number of them. One question I have is online spaces, and if that's cool with you to jump. Actually, we're not done on this other point. I was just like realizing I jumped to this other thing because I was like, my questions. But we could also stay on this because it was also nice. Yes, figuring it out as we go along.
I'm ready to jump. Yeah, I'm ready to jump.
We can always come back to this because that's also
well, just as okay,
yeah.
The last
actually, let's stay.
The last thing to say on that is like I want to say that the safety thing is a research question for me. That not like, make sure you do this safely, but how do we get more skillful as a community in looking after each other and minimizing the risk of serious harm, and how do we communicate this, how do we set expectations, you know, like there is a growing, like I think psychedelics are a really good example, because a good microsolidarity gathering has a similar impact on a lot of people as a good psychedelic trip. And we are developing some sort of formal and informal culture around how do you do psychedelics more safely. There's like really good Reddit forums and stuff about like, you really shouldn't take this with this, you know, or like you should get your stuff tested, or like it really helps if someone in the group is sober. And like I want to be able to develop the same sort of handful of everyone knows these three things, and we know that there's going to be a bunch of like amateurism and mistakes made along the way, but everyone, like for example, everyone knows you don't sleep with your students. Like that's a that there should be some like baseline things that are really clear that we discover. And I think it's actually reasonably urgent as an extending network of communities we figure this stuff out and co-create these like, what's the common knowledge that everyone knows.
Yes, such a good research question. Another thing that came to mind, we were also talking about this, like how far do you go, that you should only open wounds that you know that can close as well, you know. For example, in mediation, you say that only open wounds that are not too large for this session to at least close a little bit, you know, that you don't let people go out with some trauma that's just been reopened. And one, I forget who said it in our meeting, but also trusting people that they know, you know, like I sometimes get caught up in like, oh my God, we have to control it, but maybe also like especially when I'm thinking of just like a normal sharing circle, where people like the question I always love is what's challenging for you right now? Very simple. People share, you get a bit of resonance, and then the sharer can share again what they feel like, mini case clinic almost. And it just creates such an amount of intimacy instantly in my experience, or the circles that I was part of, that mm, yeah, in some ways I'm worried, but in other ways I'm also like, these practices are already quite well thought out in a way. That maybe, yeah, a bit of trust. I don't know. I'm still I'm still figuring it out how I think about these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, I oscillate too between like, just throw people in the deep end, or like, no, be very careful because we could hurt someone. I've
Now
also got, so, go on.
a question comes up, like, what's a safe way to take the mind along to more and more vulnerability, like that you can
Mm,
that you can share a little bit and show yourself a
mm,
little bit, and then increasingly when you feel more and more safe, that could be interesting, of having like a
yeah,
sequence.
yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say, Nati's always saying lately about dipping your toe. So like not throwing in the deep end, but like you dip your toe in the water and you feel it a little bit and you get to know what it's like, and then you step back and you dry off. And then later on you go into your knees and then you come back out and you dry off. And then you go in later, you actually really get in and go for a swim. I think the metaphor of sobriety, I think, is actually really helpful. That like when you're in a group process, nobody's completely sober. Like if it's opening things up, if it's exposing, you are a little bit like, whoa, things are intense, and then later on you sober up. And so like when someone's new to it, I think it's useful to be able to have a small dose and then sober up, and then a slightly larger dose and then sober up, and have this like, I think in the big picture, we can trust people to navigate and to make the right choices and so on. But in the short time frame, it's very easy to get carried along with peer pressure, or to suddenly have this sense of acceptance that I've never had before or haven't had in a long time, and then run away with that. And then, so for example, in the gathering we ran in Colorado last year, we have these crews that meet every day during the gathering, and they are developing more and more intimacy and closeness and care. And on the final evening, I always give them a question to talk about in their groups. And one of the prompts that I gave for the last evening was, who do you have in your life, like outside of this gathering, who's in your existing support network that would be so delighted to hear about the experience that you've had this week? Which is designed to get them to first to make a plan for like what support they're going to have after the thing's over, but also to feel that contrast between like, to just bring to, because if you're at a gathering or a retreat, like you kind of lose touch with the rest of reality. That's part of how it works. Like that's a feature. But to remember, like, oh, you have a brother, you have a best friend, or you have this like awkward relationship with your uncle, but still like there's someone that cares about you. And bringing them back into mind, and returning people back to their existing support network, instead of, because this is the other risk, is that someone has a transformative experience and then attaches all of their expectations on a group of people who never signed up for providing them long-term support. And that, I can imagine that could do a lot of harm. That's something that I really get scared about as an organizer.
Yeah, what I
Like there's been a few gatherings lately, in my sort of like extended network. Multiple times I've heard someone came to this gathering and it saved their life. Like they were suicidal until they came to this thing and they met for the first time. It feels like I feel understood, or I've got my people at last. And that's amazing to be able to give people that relief, but also it's terrifying as an organizer to know that those are the stakes for some of the people participating, that like, I want to make sure that they've got good aftercare, if they've had such an intense experience.
Yes, that is exactly the word I just wrote down, aftercare. Very, very good. Have not really thought about it that much, I realize. Maybe it's also because those people that are taking part are already in community and in support structures. But yeah, it's a very, very good thought.
Well, it's just like the whole integration experience. Like we keep coming back to the psychedelic metaphor, like the value of the psychedelic experience is in the months and months and months afterwards, as you modify your day-to-day existence to match what you learned while you were high. And as organizer, facilitator, teacher, shaman, host people, it's really hard to build a business model around integration. You know, it's easy to build a business model around we're going to have an intense weekend.
Yes.
But the integration is where the work's happening, and so like it's just a fundamental non-negotiable for me that there's some thought given into that aftercare process, that even if it's like as simple as I said, like at least on the last day get people to think about it and make a plan and put something in their calendar, or who they're going to call, or you know, something more than zero, I think is the place to start.
Totally. And that, I mean, that asking that question, what's universal, that's definitely a universal, you know, that every group needs. You know, maybe this first group doesn't need it so much because they are in community, but yes, sorry, just writing some stuff. Yeah, man, cool thoughts. My mind is already buzzing with what else to include, which is also tricky, you know, because this like format of 6 weeks, you only have certain amount of time, and like, what do we talk about? What do we mention? What practice do we do? Yeah, it's tricky to select.
Yeah. I had another thought about the research. Something that's really been kind of irritating me lately is how it seems like, how do I describe this? When the group experience is going at its best, it seems the hardest to put it into words. There's this kind of
the ineffability.
Exactly, the ineffability of it. And so it really reduces the effectiveness of what we're doing because we can't put it into words, and therefore people have to experience it firsthand, and so therefore it's spread slowly. And generally I'm a fan of small and slow, but it's like sometimes it would be nice if we could broadcast a little bit, you know, like this is a path, it's exciting, it's useful. So I've been really wondering, how do we put the ineffable into words, or at least point in the right direction that starts people off the process? And I was talking to Joe Edelman. He's actually in Berlin. And he's got this process of discovering sources of meaning and putting them into words. And I wonder if there's something that could be done around that. So I'm not qualified to teach the method, but from what I understand of it, it's like, I did this with people the other day. I'll do it with you right now, actually. So can you think about something within the broad frame of your experience of microsolidarity that really sticks out for you as like, that was an awesome moment?
I remember we had one session in one of the groups I was like the caller of and participating in, and we had just sharing sessions, and I was really deep in anger when I came to that session. And we did like a mini check-in, and I was just like, man, I'm just fucking angry at this and that, you know, like so many shitty things happened. And it was so interesting because it like all of a sudden it revealed the anger in everybody, and everyone's like, yeah, fuck, actually I'm also angry. Like and the whole session was so nice because of that, because apparently anger was in the air, and it was just needed a tiny trigger to get us to look at that. And to me, that was just the first thing that came to mind, was a really powerful moment of everybody sharing their anger and connecting over that anger. And we were feeling much less angry afterwards, and really connected, and we didn't plan for that, you know, just like, yeah, we come together and share what's happening right now, and it just happened to be anger in this moment, and it was really, really beautiful and created such a tighter bond between us, because we're showing this emotion that usually is not brought out or a bit frowned upon. Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand. It sounds like what's important to you in that story is the authenticity, like being able to express yourself regardless of like, whereas like maybe in normal context it feels there's a conformity pressure to not share that, but here you're allowed to share it. And there's something about doing it with other people that like wow, I'm also angry I get to do this with you. It's like bonding or something.
I think one part of it is being welcome however you are. I was angry and I felt okay to express that in a
Okay.
strong way.
Okay.
And the other was just feeling this connectedness and
Mm.
feeling maybe also similarity. Mm, yeah, I think these are the
Is
values
is the
behind it.
similarity thing, is that about like kind of opposite of being alone?
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not alone in this emotion, maybe something along those lines. Yeah.
Super nice. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know exactly the right way to facilitate this process, but something about getting people's stories and understanding what's meaningful about them. I think,
Man, now that you talk, we did this little process with Jocelyn Karl that Jocelyn facilitated about we were all sharing what's difficult in our project together. And then we had these needs cards on the floor, and then each person could share, like could take 2 or 3 cards and then share with the person who shared in the first place. I feel that this need is behind what you're sharing, or I think this value is important to you.
mm,
And that was really, really good. Um,
mm,
and it enabled each one of us to be seen in a way that is not so easily possible with just sharing without the focus on needs and feelings and values. Yeah, we were also thinking of how to do this online because it might be in one of the sessions.
yeah, nice.
Mm.
I'm just thinking that that process of kind of excavating the effable out of the ineffable, you know,
Mm.
like if there's a process to get that kind of, just to illustrate a few stories, like if you had 5 of those stories and they could go on the website, then for the next cohort, people kind of know what to expect, you know?
What comes up when you share this, there is a whole sort of research behind reading between the lines and finding, like in social science, you code certain words and try to find the sort of umbrella term that fits it or the meaning behind it. And that could be interesting of how do we turn written natural language and let some person or the AI analyze what's the common thread behind it, what's the meaning, what's the value, what's the need that is shared. That'd be really
I wonder
interesting.
if I wonder if an AI trained to make empathy guesses and say, is this what needs are at stake here? It's like, is this what values are important to you? I wonder if it would work. If it would help it feeling connected, or if it would be this weird, like uncanny valley.
It'd probably be weird, but the more conversations I have with ChatGPT, the more I'm like, oh my fucking god. Like this is very, very powerful, and how can we use it for the light side and not just for the dark side as it's often employed at the moment? And
Mm.
also thinking of replicability and scalability, like you can do some amazing good things with it as well. Hmm. Yeah, I'd be interested in checking that out as well.
I mean, it's not very far away from being better than the majority of therapists.
Yes. And I mean, of course, I don't want to. I'm a psychologist myself. I don't want to replace all the psychologists. But if you have to wait here in Berlin, for example, you have to wait for a long time to get a therapist's appointment. So if there is a highly trained and responsible AI that can help you, um, that's also cool, you know?
Sometimes, lately, I've been getting good help by imagining my therapist. You know,
Mm.
like that actually can help. Let's think about
Hmm.
like if I was with them now, what would I think? So I think it can be a useful part of the process.
Yeah, that's true. Cool, man. So good to talk to you.
Yeah, it's. I have to say, I don't know how to. Again, this is ineffable. It's so gratifying to see people that I trust and respect uh, leading on community initiatives under the umbrella of microsolidarity and really putting the work in to make it real and to to sign up for the long labor of negotiating with people and having the fun first cohort, but the like really difficult second or third cohort, like kind of being up for that challenge. Um, it gave me so much energy to read that today. Like it really gave me a boost of confidence and excitement about the future, and like, right, we're doing this, right? You're doing this, I'm doing this. It feels so good to know that there's people, and I don't know how much of this is just my ego trip about wanting to be a megalomaniac who rules the world, and how much of it is the imagining what it's like to have a network of cities around the world where I know that anyone with a sort of that longing in their heart for more connection and authenticity can just drop in and know there's going to be people who are excited to meet them, and like can redirect their like lost and frantic energy to something constructive where they can plug in and do some good and be taken care of. Like it's so sweet to imagine that. And I'm really grateful that you're stepping up to take this leadership role to help this thing come to life.
My pleasure. I so enjoy it. I so enjoy the whole framework. It gives me like a good way of thinking about it, you know, and then going through it. And man, with these people, that was really, as I said, the factor, you know, it's co-creation at its best. I really enjoy it, and I'm so up for exchanging more information. I mean, the Microsolidarity summer camp, I'm just applying, so totally up for scaling it to infinity, to Mars. When the first Martian Microsolidarity group is there, we reached our goal. And me, what else to do? You know, like, I mean, look at the meta crisis. Look at this sort of complex. I don't know what else to do. Like, so seems like the obvious choice. So I'm very excited and happy to chat once this experiment is over and what the next iteration might bring. Yeah.
Super exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining me in this recording as well. It's really awesome that you're up for making this transparent.
Yeah, thanks for answering all my questions and giving me so many things to more think about in the next 4 days. Thank you. Oh my God.